Thank you all for being here. And today I'll be talking about building a design system. And maybe some of you are already building one, or you have an existing library. But I really hope to give you some tips and tricks today that will help you navigate this process. And maybe even on the end of this talk, you will start your own design system. And building a design system for me is building a little bit of a city. Well, SimCity for me at least, because I'm a front-end developer. I like to play games, and SimCity is one of the games I've played tons of hours. And I soon realized within SimCity, if you don't pay proper attention to the structure, your infrastructure, your roads, well, the city won't work. Where is everybody going to live? You have to think about this before you're going to start your city. And this is a little bit like building a design system. And it's funny because I happened to stumble on a book called Ugly Belgian Houses. Maybe some of you know it. And it's the exact example of what can go wrong when building an improper design system. Yeah, of course, it's a house, but do you really want to live here? And the cover already mentioned it. Please do not try this at home. Today, let's not build an ugly Belgian house, but rather focus on something that can scale. A beautiful, maybe not so Belgian house. I really hope there are no Belgian people in here. Sorry. But with a lovely audience as here today, I would love to do a quick poll, because I'm really curious who is using a design system at the moment. And I would show of hands. It can be anything, a Tailwind config, a Chakra UI. I see a lot of hands, and this shows that having a proper system in place is something we really need as front-end developers. We really need to rely on a proper system, otherwise we cannot do our work. So I'm also really curious on who created a system like this before. Fewer hands, and it makes sense. Otherwise I was not here, I think. Building one can be a challenging task to do so. And I've got one final question for you. And to be honest, I'm a little bit guilty of this one myself as well. As who created a system or failed to create a system, and it ended up to be a component library that nobody uses anymore. I did plenty of myself. And it's mainly due to the lack of support of your system. Again, you can build something, but you still want to live in it. Have a proper building. Again, sorry, Belgian fans. And my start of a design system actually began a long time ago when I was writing my thesis. I studied communication and multimedia design here in Amsterdam. And at that time, I was working at a company in Amsterdam, and we started to realize a problem when delivering our designs to the developers. At first, it's fine. The developer or the designers give their work to the developers, and the developers can translate those designs. But over time, it gets messy. Well, you forgot to clean up your work, designers have new ideas, but never translate those to designs. And I think this was me plenty of times. And it got me back. How do architects do this within SimCity? The one thing I realized is that they have blueprints. Maybe you all built some closet from IKEA. You gotta follow the instruction, otherwise, well, you won't get up into a proper closet. So if we get a mutual understanding on how to reach our goals with the designers, developers, and maybe other stakeholders, we could create better development. At that time, I created a product called Parlor. The product failed, so please don't ask me about that. But I really like the name, and it sticks to me. Because a parlor is an old-dated term, and it's a sitting room within a private house. Nowadays, we like to watch Netflix. But back in the days, we used to communicate with each other, sit in a room. Some of you might know this, a really long time ago. And maybe we could do the same for our designs. We have a place where we can get together, where we can talk our needs. And we each leave that room again when we're finished. So the UX, the design, and the front end come together in this room called a parlor. And I think a design system is actually a proper name for this. We need to have a mutual understanding on how to reach this goal. And before I dive into all of this technical stuff, and of course React, let me first introduce myself a little bit. I'm Dennis. I'm a front-end developer. I live here in Utrecht, the Netherlands. As you might see, I like to play a game of chess. Maybe one day I will win some games, but for now it will be a DJ. So one thing I really like to do is to share a little bit of knowledge. Currently, I'm really invested in design systems. So that's what I really like talking about. And also something I really like to do at the company I work at called the vuejs. We are located in Nieuwegein in the Netherlands. But we are all different consultancies having different assignments. And currently I'm working at Schiphol. And we started to set up a new design system there, or are still trying to set up a new design system. And the first question I asked them, let's define a proper definition of a design system. If we create a definition that's suitable for all of us, we have a mutual understanding on the potential and the full potential we want to reach. So that's what we did. We created a definition. So for me and for us, a design system is actually a cohesive alignment. And I want to emphasize this little part, because a design system is a cohesive alignment among teams. This means you have to sit together, work together, find your way that works for your organization. It isn't a one-fits-all kind of solution. Yes, we have amazing tools nowadays. I have to steal Kent's presentation because the tools he showed us was amazing. And we should use this, but only after we found our way of working. Because many companies think the design system is a component library. And this is not the case. A component library is great. I currently have used Chakra, for example, and also Tailwind. But those are just integrated systems. A design system is a way of working. And that's really important. So please sit together, come together, discuss your needs. Luckily, we have tools and methods to do so. I can remember back in the day, maybe some of you as well, we delivered a Photoshop file. I think it was more than a gigabyte of designs and images. No structure at all, and I had to translate all designs to code, while with inline block and something like that. And the process took a long time. The translating part was hard, and also the files were huge, so my computer wanted to fly away. So I chose a couple of tools, but there are so many out there. Storybook, for example, is one of the amazing tools as developers we would like to integrate to show our designs. Same goes for Figma, one of the tools we can use as designers. I also included Figma tokens, Chakra AI, Tailwind, and Chromatic. But please pick your own tooling. And if you want to know more about this, please come visit me after this talk. And one of these toolings, a radical method, is the use of design tokens. I think design tokens are a fancy term for variables. We use variables already, CSS variables or whatever you would like. But you want to have that variable to all other products you have within your organization. So if you have your primary color, your hex value, you want to make sure that value is being used in all proper systems. You want to redeclare that variable, and you could use design tokens to do so. Design tokens is a standardized way of describing a category of token, for example, color tokens, with a value attached to it. And with this method, we can reach the design tool, but also reach our platforms. It's a, well, let's call it a method, a JSON structure that describes that token and that value. But this structure really helps us. Style dictionary is there in place. This is another plugin we could use to translate those tokens to the correct platform. So Nathan Curtis, an amazing blogger who wrote a little bit about this, created this diagram. And this is exactly what Style Dictionary can do for you. So at the top left, we have the color.json file you just showed. And you can transpile all values to each platform. I think as web developers, we might like to use CSS, Tailwind, or something else. Android developers could rather use a Kotlin file. So with the same standard, we could transpile the tokens to different platforms, but still have the same language. We still talk about the same button, the namings, and all conventions. This really helps us get back together when we need to. And design tokens go hand in hand with alias tokens. And those are just reference points. We have one variable and we reference another alias in another variable. And I can show you a little bit by this example. I'm using SCSS variables here. So when you have the primary 400 color, it's a little abstract, but it relates to an hex value. But now we can have a context. Say, where is the token going to be used on? For example, your background color for your button, and it has a variant or a state. In this case, it's CTA. And this makes the entire system a little bit better scalable. Because we could reuse that same primary color, that's our brand color, we could relate it to all other components we're creating. Changing a value doesn't require a change in code. It's a visual change, not something I have to do as a front-end developer. This makes design tokens really scalable. And I really like this convention, one we created at Schiphol. And it consists of multiple categories that help you navigate this process. Starting at the domain is mostly optional, but it's for your web, your app, your iOS, but you could deep nest this if you would like to. Your category is the design token. So maybe you need a color that's being used on the background, for example. So that's the usage. Where is this token going to be used on? That's the button in our case. A button can have a variant. Maybe you have multiple buttons, variants of primary, CTA, but it also goes and applies for error messages. A button also has a state. And as developers, we should help the designers with this because they do not understand state at all. Focus state is something I've explained like 20 times already to designers, and they still don't get it. A mode is also optional. You might have a light or dark mode depending on your organization. And t-shirt sizing your media queries can help you if you have different buttons or different typography sizes. All of this together brings this diagram, our blueprint for Schiphol, that we can follow if we create new tokens. Just look back to this list, follow the structure, and see what proper name we should use. But remember, not everything is required, for example, domain or your media query. If the button doesn't change depending on your size, don't use it. A button, for me, has this name. Without thinking too much about it, I immediately know how to implement this variable. It's a background color for the button and the primary default state. You could also have a hover state and a focus state, depending on our usage. This really helps me as a developer, but also our designers. Where is the tokens going to be used on, and how is it going to be used? I know how to build my closet, or a little bit better. We structured our building, and it helps me reduce this load. I can develop a little bit faster with this way. Atomic design is another principle maybe many of you are already using. Because this diagram, I think many of you have seen this before. It isn't new, but we still forget on how to do this. Atoms to molecules, to organisms and templates, and even pages, is a great way of structuring down all your smaller components. Today, let's focus on atoms and molecules, because they are the starting point of a design system. Well, you can have atoms, but you still need to structure them. We don't want to end up in the ugly Belgian houses book, at least not for me. So we need a proper way of structuring all atoms and glue them together. So I would always suggest using dump components. Make your components reusable and don't rely on the current state your project is in. New developers will come in and they have a different kind of solution or different kind of need for your current component. This means that your component should be reusable. And let's demonstrate this a little bit within a breadcrumb example, a small molecule that's easy to break down. A breadcrumb consists of a divider, so I can create a small atom for this. Left is the design I created. I'm no designer, and I'm using a chevron for my project. It is generic, but it doesn't contain too much logic. Next up is my item. I already know that for a breadcrumb, there are many states. For example, a breadcrumb item can be hovered or focused on because I can navigate to that item. So I'm writing all states and all variants in this example. And I'm using the same class name for Tailwind that relates to the token name. And we only have to glue them together. So to get this whole structure, I need to have a divider after each item, but not on the last item. Vue has a different approach to this called slots, but in React, we could loop over each children and get a child and find the proper styling needed for the child. So this way, we could add some custom breadcrumb item styling for each child and render this within our list. And this makes the use of the breadcrumb view really accessible. I don't need to know what's the purpose of my next developer. If they use React Link or Next Link, or maybe just an anchor tag. That's up to them and not for me. Also, the use of area labels or any other kind of data can be just added as a prop. And now I would like to put the whole system a little bit to the test with a little bit of live coding. And for the demo, I'm actually using design tokens combined with style dictionary and a Tailwind setup with React. Maybe some of you don't like Tailwind, but it helps me get structure for this example on what token I should use. I'm following this principle again. So I'm using, for example, the background syntax for Tailwind, followed by the colors, background, button, primary, and default. So my Figma isn't open yet. Always great, changing laptops last minute. So what I did is create a mono repo combined with Turbo, and I created a Storybook instance for just this purpose. And within this setup, I've created 3 packages. One is the design tokens. And as you can see right here, it's actually the same structure I showed earlier. You can already see my defined design system over here with the colors. So when navigating to my designs, I got hand over by my designer. I'm using the plugin called Token Studio, and I could relate all button states. In this example, I have 3 variants: primary, secondary, and tertiary. And when using Figma, I can already see, if I enable the token, what kind of naming I added to my token. Now I don't have to look up what kind of hex value is being used, but I can just relate to a spacing button.y, a background color, a border radius, and a shadow. So my project also has design tokens, a Tailwind theme, and a UI layer, which I will use to generate a new component using the new TurboGen feature. It's just boilerplating a little bit of code so we could create components a little bit faster and reuse some syntax. Always curious how fast this is going to be. So it asks me what I'm creating, what's the name of the component. In our case, it's going to be a button. And it already created 3 files for me. So navigating back to the project, I see the button, a button really generic component, and a storybook file, as I would like to render all storybook items for our design system. So the only thing I really have to do right now is change the HTML tag, of course. This is my boilerplating. And now make sure that for each variant, I'm rendering the correct classes. So I would like to do this by using a new file called button variants. I'm also using GitHub Copilot to cheat a little bit today. And I'm also using class variants authority to help me render classes. It's a light plugin that just switches classes based on state. So I can define my variants with an intent. We have a primary, for example, and this will just be some classes. I can already create the button variants by using the variants props, and we could get all required props. Let's see. Sometimes Copilot is a little bit too enthusiastic. So now I created all scenarios. Let's add them to our component. So we could create the interface and extend the button variant props. And now we can have an intent. It's already typed to primary, and if we add multiple types and states, it will also add those. So if we add those classes, we can configure those as well within our storybook. And let's, well, thank you. So now we have to follow the rules. So I can spin up my storybook instance on the background, and now I can follow the principles I've created here. So the button has a generic padding, meaning I can just insert it for all variations. I'll reset the height, as the button for CSS has a fixed height, and I'll follow the padding X for the button X. And my IntelliJ, my VS Code is already suggesting what kind of token I should use. In our example, it's a padding X for button X. So I'll accept those changes, and the same goes for a button Y. I'm also having a border, and it's a rounded button. For the primary states, we have a background. That's a colors, background, button, primary, default. So without having to go back and forth without my design, I can follow my structure. We could also do the same for a, oh, storybook just spun up. So we have a hover state, we can have a focus state, and well, my Copilot already suggests all states. So now we can see what it's actually going to look like if I choose the proper variant. Without going back and forth, I've defined my first button. It helps me speed up the component. I can add a shadow, and it's called the button primary default. Again, thank you, Copilot, because it now understands, based on the rules and the mutual understanding, what I want to achieve over here. Now we have a shadow on hover state. This, for me, helps me get grip on my components without having to go back and forth between the designers, read out my Figma. I can just follow the understanding we created earlier. And what's amazing is if I create a secondary button, I can just copy out all variables, change the primary to secondary, and we have the button. So I won't finish the whole button, but it gives the idea on how to structure your components. It really helps me understand what's going to happen. And this also helps me when I'm going to change something. So for some reason, if the designer thinks, well, this sounds really good, but the state for the hover button, I'm going to change this value. So they go back to their tooling. I don't have to do anything at all. And they change this value to, I'm no designer. So I think this is a really good color for this, for us in hover state. They showed the design, everybody approved. Not sure what business you're working at if this is the approval, but it can be. And they can push the changes to GitHub from within Figma. I changed the button. And let me check out the latest code on the main branch. And let's start up the new storybook container. Already looking at the code, I could probably see within the web that the hover state is changed. It doesn't require me to change the code. The designer can now focus on their UI styling, and I will have to follow those rules we align together. Let's see how quick Storybook is today. The change to feet, like primarily, it's still great, but even with 3 components, it can take a while, unfortunately. And if I reload my VS Code, I can, there we go. The primary color now has a hover state that's orange for some reason, but I didn't have to change my code. I just have to release the latest changes. So with building a design system, first sit together, define your way of working. But luckily we have tooling, design tokens. Please use them. Alias tokens help you get that structure while using design tokens. Find your naming. I really like the one I suggested you. And use the atomic design and dump components that go with them. And of course, please don't create an ugly Belgian house. For the Dutch fans, a ramp is a disaster. So thank you all for listening. And if you want to check out the full monorepo, you can scan the QR code. It's also included the slides, and you can experiment a little bit. I also included the Figma if you want to experiment for yourself. Thank you.